we're going to start with chapter 9 here, which deals, I'm sorry, not chapter 9, chapter 8. We're going to start with chapter 8, which deals with political participation and voting. We'll do chapter 9 next week. So let me go ahead and share the screen really quickly so that way we can get started. And test was fine. It wasn't difficult for me, but we'll see once they're, oh, okay, right. Oh, that's right. Yes, there's, oh, I know what you're talking about. There was one of those essay questions, right? I've been trying to to fix those because the test is supposed to be all multiple choice. I don't know why those essay questions keep getting pulled from the pool of questions. So that's fine. I'll have to go through that but thank you for still answering it. I'm sure it wasn't a hard question, but that's fine. I'll go back in there and I'll grade it. But yeah, no, I've been trying to work on that, but I guess I'll have to do something else because it's supposed to be all multiple choice. So I'm very sorry about that. But anyway, so let's go ahead and connection is poor right now. Wasn't hard, but it's okay. Okay, that's weird. Well, I'm glad to hear that it wasn't too difficult. That's weird that my internet's slow, even though I'm using the computer in the office that's directly connected to it. I don't know. Well, if I start to lag, that at least we know why. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with chapter 8, which deals with political participation and voting. So this chapter, of course, obviously, as you can see, deals with not just voting itself, but also other ways that people get involved in the political process. And so, even though voting is going to take a majority of the attention within this chapter, we will take a look at some other ways that people can get involved politically here. So that's pretty much the basis for what this chapter is going to be. We're going to be taking a look at also different groups within American society and how they tend to vote. We'll take a look at voting trends for whites, African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and of course we're also going to take a look at a little bit of history. We'll talk about the suffrage movement within the United States, the women's suffrage movement, as well as other movements throughout the United States that have aimed to increase voter participation. So we'll take a look at a little bit of the history of voting as well, so to speak. So when we take a look at political participation refers to a wide range of activities in politics, including voting, attending campaign events, contributing to campaigns, volunteering on campaigns, working for political organizations, protests, demonstrations, and strikes, publicly supporting or opposing a candidate or campaign on social media, as well as organizing campaign events. So, as you can see here, there's a bunch of ways that people can get involved in the political process, and I'm sure that you all have probably engaged in at least some of these things, right? I mean, what are some of the things that of this list? What are some of the forms of political participation that you all have engaged in? Does anyone want to share, like, what are some of the things that you all have done, like, of this list? Or maybe there's other things that aren't even on this list that maybe you participated in that are political in nature. Does anyone want to share, some of their own personal examples of some of these events or different types of ways that you all have gotten involved in the political process? Does anyone want to share any of these, or have any of y'all voted before? Let me check the chat really quickly. Okay, so voting for Veto this past year. Okay, Diana. So you engaged in the political process by voting, but I don't think that's the only thing you've done, right? I mean, I believe you've also been very politically active in other areas too, right? Have there been other areas, other things that you've done as well, besides voting? Going back to this list, or maybe other things that maybe things might not, other things that you could think of in terms of how you've gotten involved politically. I mean, have you talked to family members, friends? Did you also try to convince them to vote too, like, or not really? Was it just you? Voting and campaigning. Okay, so Hazel says voting and campaigning. My stepdad runs a lot of local campaigns in Forest. Okay, good, nice. So you're involved in the local political scene. Nice, very very good, Hazel. Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of us here in the valley. Well, okay, maybe not a lot of us, but there are a good number of people in the valley who get involved in political campaigns and get involved in these local elections, especially because, sorry about that, let me silence my phone. Especially because of the fact that for a lot of these people, they're supporting family members, they're supporting friends, so it becomes a very personal type of it becomes a very personal type of event, right? Where we want to help out, our the people that are close to us, and so that's why a lot of these campaigns can be very festive, right? It can be kind of like going to like a tailgate party, right? They've got they're cooking the fajitas and all that stuff, that they it becomes like a party atmosphere, right? Like I've been to, I've seen like polling locations where they do that, right? They've got like the signs and the banners. Like I said, it's almost like going like to a football tailgate, right? It becomes a very festive, and of course they even have like the election watch parties and they've got food and all that. So that's kind of like how we do politics down here locally. We it definitely becomes like a family event type of thing. So, Dariana says, I've been politically active in talking to friends and family and encourage them to vote. And so they become aware of the topics that these politicians are trying to help in, such as gun reform, abortion laws, weather. So, okay, very good. So the both of you all are very involved, politically when it comes to not just voting, but also, um, going to these rallies, having these discussions, and getting involved with the community, right? So that's really awesome that you all are engaging in a lot of these different activities, right? And so, of course, yes, I've also done a lot of these things as well here, um, not just voting, but also volunteering on campaigns. I'm part of some local organizations that are trying to increase voter turnout. I've been a VDR, a voter deputy registrar, where I register people to vote. Um, and I'm a former precinct chair, so I've been involved in local politics, and I was a state and a national delegate for Bernie Sanders in the 2020 Democrat convention. So I've done a lot of different things as well. Um, and I've helped out with a lot of different campaigns across the federal, state, and local levels. Like I said, I've been a volunteer. So, and my mom also my mom actually worked for the Bethel campaign. So it's so we definitely come from we're definitely very political as well. I like to be more politically active though in local politics and more within my committee. And yes, Diana, that's extremely important because, as we've talked before, local politics doesn't get the attention that it needs to. Everyone's always talking. I mean, look. So Trump was in Waco this past weekend, and everyone's already talking about the 2024 election. So, but the thing though is that we don't get that same type of attention at the local level. We're getting a little bit more attention at the state level, thankfully. We are getting, like the state newspapers, like the Texas Tribune, will cover the Texas legislature in depth. But local politics doesn't really get the attention that it should get, right? We have our local newspapers and our local, media outlets, but they just don't have the resources to be able to cover politics like the national and even the state newspapers do. So what happens is that the community really misses out because they don't get, they don't get an in-depth analysis of these local races and who these people are and what is it that they're going to do. A lot of people don't even know what these positions that they're running for are what they do, right? I'm already seeing signs for school board elections. Have you all seen signs for those already? Because I know we've got some school board races already coming up in the next month or so, right? So that's why a lot of the signs are already going up, like in McAllen. I live in the Sharyland area, so I've already seen some signs. And every time I see those signs, I always think to myself, well, I mean, why should I vote for you? Like, uh, I'm not going to learn anything just from a sign with your smiling face on there, right? I want to learn more about you. But the problem is that that information is very hard to find, if accessible at all, because the candidates they don't have to, post information. They don't have to have like a website where put in, like what your stances are, what you're going to do for the community. I mean, they'll have like their Facebooks, but at the same time, you have to understand that you have to take that with a grain of salt, right? Because it's their own campaign Facebooks and things like that. So, yeah, and I'm just kind of going all over the place a little bit here, but I wanted to just kind of start with a quick discussion on some of the ways that we have been politically active. And yes, getting involved in local politics is extremely important because the local politics are the level of politics that we're going to feel the most, right? when it comes to property taxes, when it comes to city ordinances. Those are the regulations that we're going to feel more, as opposed to national policies that kind of trickle down to us at the local level. That's not to say that we don't, especially because of the fact that we are on border, so we see tons of federal involvement. However, though, when it comes to our daily lives, the state and the local governments tend to have more of an influence than the national government does. So that's why it's important for us to get involved in those local politics. Know who your school board members are, and hold them accountable, because they're what they, people don't realize, right, that school board members have a lot of power, right, when it comes to getting involved in the education of our students, but also the way money is allocated within the school district. So it is important for people to get involved, right? So going back to this list, right? Um, a lot of different ways that people can get involved here, right? Um, and like you all said, you all have engaged in a lot of these, different types of events. I've been to protests as well, events. I know when Trump came down, he's been down here a couple times in the Valley. I went to they had an event there on the corner of, like where the mall is there by the Logans. That's where because they were waiting by the airport for Trump to show up. And so you had, on one side you had the Trump supporters, and on the other side you had the protesters. And so it was. I actually saw a guy get arrested because he was getting in the face. It was a Trump supporter, and he was getting in the face of the protesters, and so they got into a scuffle. And so the police then, because the police were there, obviously, of course, monitoring the situation, and then they went in and they escorted the guy and they arrested him. So yeah, it can get pretty wild at some of these events here. But yes, all of these different, these are different ways that people can get involved in the political process here. Right now, if we break down the percentage of the people who report participating in each activity, we notice that voting is by far the most common, right? And then it goes down to, at 79%. Then it goes down to publicly expressing support for a campaign, 42%, contacting an elected official. Now, this one I actually was a little bit surprised at this one, right? That 40% of people who do report participating, uh, that they actually do contact elected officials. And then it goes down to 29% attending a local government meeting, contributing money, 29% attending a rally. See, I thought attending a rally would probably be a little bit higher than contacting an elected official. Of course, we'll explain a little bit, and then of course working or volunteering. Now, what I want to ask you all really quickly before we dive into this is, why do you all think that voting is at the top of this list? Why is voting almost double? It gets almost double the percentage of the activities as opposed to the next one. Why do so many more of these people who actually participate, why do they engage in voting as opposed to, like, contacting an elected official or attending a local government meeting? Let's check the chat really quickly. Maybe because it requires the least effort. Yes, Diana. Yes, you're exactly right. That is, it's twofold, right? Because it requires the least effort, and it's also the most consequential of these, right? Because all this other stuff, it's not necessarily that it's irrelevant, but it all leads to this, right? Because going to rallies, contributing money, working on a campaign, you're working towards this, right? You're working towards getting your candidate elected. So all of this builds into this, right? This is the most important. It's the culmination of all those other things that you're doing. And so because of that, it definitely carries a lot more importance, because that's the end result. Some of these, of course, are understandable, like contributing money. It's very hard for people to contribute money. I didn't start contributing to candidates until I started working as a professional. So 10 years ago, when I was still struggling and trying to, and I was working, that's when I was working at SEC Security, and I was making like 26,000 a year, barely, not even 30. So there's no way that I could have been able to contribute any money to a candidate, because I had my bills that I had to pay. Although I still have more bills now. It's interesting, right? The more money I make, the more I spend. It's just insane how much I'm spending now compared to what I used to spend. But it's because I have a lot more bills and I have a lot more responsibility now that I can afford it. But the point is that of course is difficult for the average person. Working for a campaign or volunteering, that's, you can see why that's by far the least likely one, because a lot of us are busy, right? it's like when I talk about how a lot of my friends are in Austin right now. They're talking to the legislators, and they're trying to advocate for the community. Um, they can do that because that's their job, right? A lot of them work for these nonprofits where that's their job, right? See, if I wanted to do that, I would have to do that on my own time. So for those of us who are working and our job is not, I mean, yes, my job is, I talk about politics, right? My job is not necessarily within politics. My job is, again, I'm more like the ESPN analyst, right? So I'm not actually, as opposed to like a coach or an assistant coach, right? That they're actually working in the sport. I'm just on the outside, covering it, so to speak, right? So things like that. Um, so that's why it makes sense that this one is a lot less than some of these other ones, right? But yeah, so anyway, so let's go ahead and move on really quickly. So protest, of course, is used to raise awareness, attract media, and send a message to leaders. Peaceful protest, of course, is protected by the First Amendment and is generally recognized as a legitimate and important form of political activity. For much of U.S. history, more Americans engage in protest activity than in voting. And of course, if you all studied U.S. History Part 1, you'll be very familiar with how protesting was effective during before the American Revolution, right? You're probably familiar with the boycotts when it came to fighting back against, the Stamp Act, and then we had the Intolerable Acts later on, right? And there was, protests, with the Liberty Poles and the and obviously, of course, the printing of the pamphlets and the newspapers that were very critical of what Great Britain was doing to the colonists, right? So there was a lot of organizing, and this organizing led, to protests and to rallies and to these boycotts, which did prove to be effective in the lead up to the American Revolutionary War, right? So the reason why that's important is because protesting is in American DNA, right? It's in our blood, right? It's what we do. Uh, so that's why it's something that and I've been to protests myself, right? Um, I don't necessarily know if I be okay with going to them now because it's kind of getting a little bit more dangerous because unfortunately the political rhetoric is getting it is what it is, right? We're seeing some of these other things happening, and so um, I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from going to protest, but just know that it does carry some risk, right? So and it shouldn't, right? Because that is our First Amendment right, our freedom of speech, right? To be able to speak out against the government or to support the government, right? So you can have, two sides, to these issues, and you can have, protesters and counter protesters and things like that. And, as long as it doesn't get, ugly like it did at that Trump rally a couple of years ago, that should be fine, right? People have the right to organize and to peacefully assemble, right? So again, so that's why that's why protesting, and protesting, of course, is looked at as an effective means because, as it says, right, it gets the media's attention, right? The media will be, because it makes sense that the media would cover protests because it's not every day that you have a large group of people showing up at one location and engaging in like a march, right? That that's like if, let's say, I had like 10 students waiting outside my office, I'd be like, oh shoot, like something's really wrong, because that doesn't normally happen. So it attracts the media because they're going to cover it. It creates awareness because, again, people see that, hey, this doesn't normally happen, and then it sends a message, right? So again, like if I had 10 students waiting outside my office, that would send a message that something's wrong and I have to address it, right? So the idea is to bring attention to these issues, right? Okay, let's kind of move over here to let's get a little bit into voting, right? So the right to vote or suffrage is a legal right. We have that right to vote. Um, of course, this right to vote is predicated on certain conditions, right? Um, Now, originally, for much of U.S. history, suffrage was restricted, right? Originally, voting in many states was initially restricted to white male property owners over the age of 21, right? There's a good video that I have there in the chapter, which discusses it's a TED Ed video, and it talks about the history of voting in the United States, and it talks about this, right? It talks about how that originally uh, there were a lot of restrictions for people in terms of who could vote, right? Again, limited to uh, white male property owners over the age of 21. So you had to own property in order to be able to vote back during the early times of the United States and things like that. Uh, Of course, we've also had other methods, such as the poll taxes, the fees to vote. Basically, you have to pay to vote, have been used to restrict voting. As well as the literacy tests were designed to stop minorities from voting. So we had a lot of these provisions that were put in place, which we kind of talked about before, right? During the Chapter 5, the civil rights chapter discussion. We talked about this, how this, and of course, you all know this from history, right? This, of course, obviously came to be. At the at the conclusion of the American Civil War, and we had and the end of Reconstruction. Right after Reconstruction ended, then the South was able to come back into power, and they instituted the Jim Crow era restrictions that were put in place on minorities, particularly African Americans in the South. Right, so these are some examples. Right, states often took a lead role in restricting suffrage. There were laws limiting immigrants from voting in northern cities. So yeah, originally, like in cities like New York, they used to allow immigrants to vote, but then they started to put restrictions on that to where you had to meet those citizenship requirements. And again, laws preventing African Americans in the South from voting, which are these two poll taxes and the literacy tests here. Okay, so voting rights and reform. So despite restrictions, the dominant trend has been to expand the vote. So the book talks about how even though we've had issues with voting, right, and we've had issues with accessibility, the arrow has been pointing upward, right? The trend has been pointing upward to where now we are allowing for more and more people to be able to be eligible to vote, right? Examples include the 15th Amendment, which enfranchises Black men. This was this was part of the three post-Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So the 15th Amendment provided these voting rights to the African American males. Women didn't have the right to vote yet. Of course, obviously, we get to the 19th Amendment, right, which enfranchises women at the national level. Because if you remember from Chapter 5, we talked about how that some of these Western states were already allowing for women to have the right to vote at the state level. But nationally, we had the 19th Amendment, which allowed for women, to be able to have the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, which we also mentioned in Chapter 5, allows the federal government to challenge laws affecting minority voters. So at the time, the federal government, what they would do is that uh, they would put restrictions on the southern states that had a history of suppressing votes. And of course, we talked about the Shelby County v. Holder case, which kind of undid, some of the provisions here within the Voting Rights Act. But originally, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was vital to ensure that states that had restricted voting access would not be allowed to do so. And then the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. And the video talks about the reason for this, right? It talks about how that this was during the Vietnam War era, right? The late 60s, early 70s. And I'm sure you all know from history, right? Are you all familiar that the Vietnam War was very unpopular, that there was a lot of protests, right? A lot of protests. If you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, you'll know about that, right? There's one of those scenes where Forrest is there at the rally there at the reflecting pool, right? So huge, tons of protests that was going on, very unpopular war. And so what was going on at the time was that you had this movement going on where they were trying to lower the voting age from 21 to 18 because the argument is that, hey, you've got 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are being drafted to go to Vietnam, but they can't do anything about it politically, right? They can't get involved in the political process, right? So how is it fair that we're sending these 18, 19, 20-year-olds to go fight in a war that they might not agree with? So that was a very popular and strong argument to lower the voting age to 18, so that once you become an adult, you can vote. And that's the context as to why the 26th Amendment passed in 1971, because of the backdrop, in terms of the backdrop of the Vietnam War here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about turnout really quickly. So U.S. voter turnout nationally is relatively low, especially when you compare it to other countries. And if you compare it like by states, Texas is amongst some of the lowest here. Of course, that's more so for Texas government, but we'll reference it here. So voter turnout. So percentage of eligible individuals who actually vote. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention also that now the requirements for voting now is if you're 18 and you're a U.S. citizen and you're not involved in any type of legal trouble, you are eligible to register to vote, right? So you do have to register before, but if you meet those three requirements, then you're fine to vote, right? and some states do have a little bit different. They like, especially when it comes to like the legal trouble aspect. Some states have it a little bit different, right? So in Texas, the way it works is um, as long as you're not involved in the criminal justice system, whether you're in prison or you're on probation or whatever, once you're off of that, then your right to vote is restored. In Florida, though, it's even more strict, where even if you already like served your sentence, like you lose your right to vote if you're a convicted felon. Which there is discussion on trying to change that, but the states, they're the ones who decide the eligibility for people being able to vote. But again, let's talk a little bit about turnout here really quickly. So voter turnout, of course, is the percentage of eligible individuals who actually vote, right? So the percentage of people who are eligible to vote. So again, if you look at the number, oh, somebody emailed me. Um, that scared me. That scared me for a bit. I thought someone was at my door. Um, the percentage of people who are eligible to vote, right? So that 18, that 18 citizenship numbers, how many of those people actually do vote? That's what voter turnout measures, right? So in the most recent presidential election, we had 67% of people, so 2/3 of eligible people who could vote ended up voting. Now you might say to yourself, hey, 67, 2/3, that's not too bad. Well, yeah, when you compare it to like, when you compare it to like, oh, that now it's because what's going on is that STC is sending those emails like they like yeah, that's what's going on. Like at around this time in the early afternoon, they start sending all like the emails from the college, right? Like the way it works is like they'll send like they'll tell us to see, hey, we want you to send this email out from our department, and then so then they just start sending them all out. So that's why you're gonna probably hear that a lot. But anyway, so let's continue. Uh, let me hold on. Let me just close my email really quickly because that's gonna keep happening. Okay, there we go. Now I don't have to worry about it. Okay, anyway, so let's continue. Okay, so then the turnout again, 67%. But look at some of these turnout rates for some of these other countries, like Belgium, 87%, almost everybody. Sweden, 86, almost everyone. France is somewhat comparable to the United States, but still a little bit higher, right? Um, Now, I do also have to mention that in some of these countries, they do have laws on the books that make it to where you have to vote, right? And like it's mandatory. Some countries are strict like that. Some of them are not as strict, and some of them have other ways to incentivize people to vote. Like some countries also allow for elections, like they designate election day like as a national holiday, right? Where you can, where you don't have to, where because you're not working, you can go and vote, right? That's the whole point, to give people a day off to be able to vote, right? So there's different ways that some of these countries are able to get higher voter turnout rates than the United States. Education and income levels definitely tracks with voter turnout, and the idea is that there is a positive correlation where the higher levels of education and the higher income levels do can be a good predictor in terms of more voter turnouts, right? Which definitely does make a lot of sense, right? Because the more educated you are, the more likely you're going to know about, this. I mean, not everyone takes government 2305, right? So because and you all, of course, were politically active even before this, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that the only people who have taken these classes or have gone to college, are politically active, right? Because you all were politically active even before going to college, right? So that's not to say that that's always the case, but more often than not, right? And usually income levels also does correlate with education, not all the time, but usually there is that correlation between higher levels of education and and higher income. I mean, that's the whole reason why you're here in this class, right? Because you want to make more money. Turnout reached a modern low in 1996 with 52%. That was the Clinton versus Bob Dole election. Yeah, I could see why that one didn't really get too much attention, but reached a modern high in 2020, and I think we all can also probably know why the 2020 election got a lot of attention, right? I think there's a lot of reasons for that, right? There's obviously, of course, the pandemic had just started. There was things were definitely very dire, when it came to society, and so there was a good reason for people to pay attention more so than in usual years, right? Because when things are going bad, people will pay attention a little bit more here. Okay, so let's continue a little bit here more. Let's see. 'Cause I know we have about 10 minutes left. So let's see if we can. Okay, let's see if we can get through this as quickly as we can. Okay. So midterm elections also tend to have lower voter turnout compared to presidential elections. Midterm elections turnout is typically 20 points lower than presidential elections, and it's heavily skewed towards habitual voters who are usually older, affluent, and partisan, right? So this is talking about how, again, and we've kind of mentioned this before, right? It's kind of like, let me give you a sports example here. So everyone's going crazy over the NCAA tournament, even though I'm sad that Texas lost, but Miami was, they're a good team. That's usually the only time when a lot of people will tune in to watch college basketball, right? Is during the NCAA tournament, or people will tune in to watch the Super Bowl, or they just tune in to watch the playoffs, right? Like the World Series or things like that, right? The numbers for the regular season games are always lower than the playoff games, right? And there's a reason for this, right? Because the playoff games get a lot more attention. This is kind of like the way it is with presidential elections and midterm elections, right? Where midterm elections are not going to get midterm elections are kind of like a regular season game, and presidential elections are like the Super Bowl or the playoffs or things like that, right? So they're going to get more attention. Now, of course, we've talked about how should it be that way, but regardless of that, that's still the presidential election still gets a lot more attention than these other elections, right? So because people don't really tune in to these elections as they would with the presidential, you're going to see that there's going to be lower, there's going to be a lot lower voter turnout, and the only people who are going to be tending to vote are the habitual voters, right? These are the hardcore fans, right? These are the people that watch all the games, right? And they're like, so these are like your hardcore voters, right? These are your hardcore political activists and people who really care about politics, right? Kind of like us here, right? Because most people don't get involved in politics at the level that we do, right? So these people are going to be voting in these midterm elections. These are also the same people that are going to vote like in local elections, right? Local elections, oh my goodness, local election turnout rates are even lower than this. I said before that city elections can range between like 5 and 10% voter turnout. It's insane how little people how it's insane how little the attention that these local elections get from the community. I mean, it's for your mayor, like, and only 10% of people turn out for a mayoral election. Where's the other 90% of the people? And it's not like a situation where we don't. It's also because some people might think, well, is it fair that only 10% of the people decide who the mayor is going to be? Well, if that's who shows up, that's who shows up, right? It's not like they can go and be like, well, we need to run this election again because only 10 people showed up, so we need to, kind of like when I wait for you all, like, oh, we've only got, 2 people here, well, that's then we're just gonna have to go with that, right? So, but yes, but what I'm trying to say here, I know I'm just kind of like going all over the place. What I'm trying to say here is that the voting numbers are a lot less for these midterm elections, right? Only 36% of eligible voters voted in the 2014 midterm. 53% voted in the 2018 midterm election. So we have seen a little bit of an uptick here in these midterms. So we are seeing more of this political activity, which is a good thing, right? I do want to see more people vote. I want to see more people get involved in the political process here. Um, even if it's like people who are voting that I don't agree with, I mean, I still want for people to go and get involved in the political process, regardless of who they're voting for. I actually talked about this a couple of years ago during the 2020 presidential election. I was actually on it was Channel 4, right? Yeah, I was on Channel 4, and they asked me to be like an analyst. It's interesting, right? Because for many years, I used to watch, on election night, I used to watch the local news, and they used to have Dr. Paul from UCRGV give his thoughts, but he's already retired. So I kind of took his place, right? So that was really cool. Like I didn't realize it at the time. I was like, wow, like that was pretty prestigious. So now I'm doing those things, So I thought it was really cool. But anyway, but the point I'm trying to make is that I made an argument that because we were having a discussion about voting, and we were talking about like Trump supporters and things like that, and there was like discussions about because there was another professor from UTRGV. She was giving her thoughts about the Trump supporters and things like that, and I was basically making the argument that, hey, like, they have a right to vote just like everyone else does. They have their reasons for why they want to vote. As a political scientist, we should be trying to study this. We should be trying to figure out, hey, why is it that Trump is so effective in getting people to turn out to vote for him. There's something there, right? We need to try to investigate this more. So I was trying not to downplay it, because honestly, and that's how I honestly am. Like, I generally am interested. I want to know, why there's more Republican support down here in the Valley. I want to learn about that. It's very interesting. I want to learn more about it, and I want to, So anyway, I was just kind of saying that, that evening. So I think it's somewhere on Facebook, so you can always go watch it if you don't want to. But with that being said, so beyond voting, other forms of traditional political participation were common in 2018. Traditional forms of participation include voting, making campaign contributions, volunteering on a campaign, or working for a political organization, right? So again, and as I've said before, you all have done this. I've done this as well. It can be difficult to do this, especially with how busy we are with life. That's why I've always liked to tell, like, my political friends, like, I always tell them, look, I feel bad that I can't do more to help you all, because I know that I could. I feel bad because I know that I would be a very good asset to them, and I know that I could really help them out, but I just don't have the time, because I've got my full-time job. I'm also studying. I just, but my friends, they're very understanding. They understand that I'm not just being lazy, right? They understand that I've got a lot that I'm working on, and so. But yeah, it definitely, so for those people who want to get involved in these traditional forms, you definitely have to have a lot of time, right? So my mom, like I said, she worked for the Bethel campaign. There's no way she could have done that if she was working still as a teacher, right? Or she used to be a principal as well. So there's no way that she could have done that, right? Unless she was already retired. So she was retired, and so she was able to help out here. Okay, really quickly, let's go to let's go. Let's cover this really quickly. Let's cover online political participation, and then we'll end for today, because I know it's already going to be time. So, a common way to participate in politics is through what's called digital political participation. Um, Digital political participation consists of activities designed to influence politics using the internet, including visiting a candidate's website, organizing events online, signing an online petition. Now, social media has really changed the game here. And I was old enough to vividly remember when social media was first coming out and it was being used politically. This was during the 2008 presidential election. Facebook was in its infancy back then. It's nowhere near what it is today. Former President Obama was the first major presidential candidate to use Facebook as a way to use it. He was the first major presidential candidate to use it, to use Facebook as a means to engage in digital political participation, right? Because originally, candidates have had their websites before, right? That's not something that's all that new, right? But going back to when the internet started to become more accessible during the 1990s. But what started to change was these social media, platforms, right? Like, you probably remember, like, MySpace and all that stuff. We started to see the infancy of social media. I just dated myself, right? But anyway, that's all. My goodness, that's almost 20 years ago. But with that being said, so President Obama, started using Facebook, and so he was the first major candidate to use social media to run his campaign through it, right? And then, of course, we also saw former President Trump uses Twitter, right? So we see that these political candidates will use social media, and it's very effective. Social media allows for person-to-person communication and broadcast capability. Social media also makes possible tiny acts, sharing, following a candidate or organization, liking a post, commenting, that can scale up to dramatic changes. These scaled up acts include real-world political protests, voter mobilization drives, and the election of candidates and parties to government. So social media, while I've got a love-hate relationship with it, you can't deny that social media is you can't deny its effectiveness, especially when it comes to the political world, right? There's so much you can do with it, right? You can set up Facebook groups. You can set up now, and more so in the last couple of years, now we have these telecommunication tools like Zoom, where you can engage in meetings all over the world, right? You can have people communicating with each other, right? So the internet has definitely allowed for candidates to be able to get their message out, to more people, making it easier also to access this content, right? Because websites can be difficult, everyone designs it differently, but with Facebook, it's the way it's designed is the same. So it's definitely a lot more user friendly. So of course people know how to use it. So there's a lot that you can do with this, right? So again, politicians use social media as well. Like we talked about, social media allows for the discussion of issues and mobilization of supporters via Facebook and Twitter because of that interaction. Digital politics can create punctuated, explosive bursts of collective action because of the fact that everyone's on it, right? Pretty much so. So you can reach a lot more people. Critics dismiss social media as clicktivism, forms of participation that require little effort and may not convert to offline acts participation. And there is something to this, right? There is a lot to this where it's easy to get involved online, but to actually engage in the call to action, like, okay, we're going to meet on this day. Um, while it's easier to create those events on social media, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be more engaged, so to speak, right? That's what it's talking about, right? So digital politics encourages information gathering and interaction. It is associated with an increased likelihood that a person will vote and contribute to political campaigns, volunteer on behalf of candidates, and connect and contact elected officials and discuss politics with friends and family, develop an interest in politics and become more informed, right? So even though there is, it's not a panacea, so to speak, right? Where in terms of social media political involvement, right? You're still going to have lots of people that aren't going to get engaged, but because it's free, right? Because social media is free, the cost definitely, the benefit definitely outweighs the cost, right? Because it doesn't take much to get online and to set up these events and to mobilize people. So if you can get at least a few people to get mobilized that you wouldn't have been able to before, then it's all worth it, right? So even though it might not necessarily be as effective as some people are saying, it is somewhat effective, right? And the ease of making monetary contributions online has increased the number of small individual donations. Yeah, it's very easy now to make donations. Let me explain to you really quickly before we end. So, let me just kind of walk you all through the process. So, on the Democrat side, there is a website called Act Blue, and you just go in there and it's already got your information saved, and you just have to do like 2 clicks, and then you're already done. You've already made your contribution, and then it also shows a tally of all the contributions that you've made to all these different candidates and things like that. So it's very easy to use. Social media such as Twitter could be an important tool in voter mobilization as well in terms of getting those messages out. Let's see. Okay, okay, really quickly. Let's just go to let's see, where is I wanted to get to accidental mobilization. Okay, let's talk about this really quick and then we'll end. So digital politics may also foster increased participation for a number of reasons. Information and in-depth, immediate political news is available online 24 hours a day, and access is often free. Again, this is why you've got those friends of yours that probably that's all they do is they're on like Twitter and they're just tweeting about politics all day. I'm mostly that, although I do sprinkle in some sports and things like that. But yeah, I'm mostly that annoying friend that just talks politics on social media all day. Um, and of course, there's a rise in all types of content, right? It's not like the way it was back in the 60s where you only had like Walter Cronkite and a couple of other news broadcasters, right? You just had ABC, CBS, NBC, and that was it, right? That was all the news that you got. Now we've got all kinds of news outlets. Back in the 90s, we started, that was the beginning of the 24/7 cable news networks like Fox News and MSNBC, and CNN had also started a little bit before that hand as well, right? But now it's not just them, right? We've got all kinds of media outlets on YouTube. We've got all kinds of podcasts. There's the Midas Touch. We've got other YouTubers such as Democracy Now, the Young Turks, and all kinds of stuff, right? There's all kinds of political content out there. Like it's just like with anything, right? There's all kind of content out there, so there's tons of political content. Um, and so because there's so much out there, that leads to what's called accidental mobilization. Internet users may see political ads on social media, in Google searches, and so on. I know that in the run up to the election, you could not escape political ads on YouTube. Every ad that you would see would be a political ad. I don't know if y'all remember that, right? Like every ad on YouTube was a political ad. It was insane just how many ads we were getting. So that's an example of accidental mobilization because you didn't click these are for the people who didn't click on YouTube to look at politics, right? So because what I'm trying to say is that it's trying to reach people who aren't, going to those sites because they want to look up politics. So it's trying to get those people, to get their attention, so to speak, right? Because they accidentally got mobilized because they weren't planning to do so in the first place, right? Political participation requires less effort and may attract people with only moderate political interest. The digital media may help reverse the decline in political participation. Right. So with more of that content out there, it does make sense that we might see more of that. More of that coming up. So okay, so let's go to info today because I know it's already time. So let's go ahead and stop here for today.